Hi, you guys. Welcome back to another edition of History Tea because honestly, we are about to get this tea in chapter 17 of your text titled Freedom's Boundaries at Home and Abroad. So, the scope of this chapter is about 10 years. So, even though it's about 10 years, we may talk about some things from the 1880s and from the early 1900s. This chapter is honestly a continuation from last chapter. Last chapter, we talked about the Gilded Age. And remember, this era is called Gilded because something gilded means that it is covered with a nice, shiny exterior that hides something that is honestly rotten on the inside. And so we continue, we dive a little deeper in chapter 17 when we talk about some of freedom's boundaries at home and abroad. So let's start this tea. Let's get some of this history tea. So, chapter 17 starts with talking about the farmers' revolt. Okay. So, at this time, farmers are in a pretty large amount of debt. There has been a drought, which has impacted their crops. There's also the high transport costs as well, and high storage costs. And they have loans that they're getting, but the interest rates are incredibly high. And so, in the 1870s, in 1870, the Farmers Alliance is created in Texas, and it will be the largest citizens movement of the 19th century. By 1890, 43 states have their own chapters of the Farmers Alliance. And so they come up with a platform where they believe that the government needs to establish warehouses where farmers will be able to store their crops until they're sold in order to help these farmers out. And they believe that their crops that they're storing could be used as collateral. The government could then issue loans to the farmers at low interest rates because at this time they're getting loans from banks. However, the interest rates are really, really high. And so it's difficult to pay down that principal. And so they figure that if the government can give them loans, that they can get these loans at a pretty low interest rate, thus ending the farmers' dependence upon larger banks and on merchants. By the early 1890s, the Farmers Alliance will evolve into the People's Party or the Populists. Okay, the People's Party, also known as the Populists. And this will be this era's greatest political insurgency. The populists will really seek to speak for the farming classes and for the producing classes, okay? And it will really signify farmers' hostility towards the government. At this point, a lot of farmers and a lot of those in the producing classes believe that industrialization, and big businesses such as the railroad, for example, and corruption in government and in a lot of these businesses were responsible for their plight. And so populists at this time, again, believe that the US has been ruined by political corruption. And remember, at this time, as we studied last chapter, politics is known for its corruption. The Gilded Age is known as being rife with political corruption. Last chapter alone, we talked about the credit mobilier scandal, where an inner ring of Union Pacific stockholders will essentially will sign contracts with themselves in order to have profit in these government aided or government paid for programs. And so at this time, political corruption is really common. And a lot of these farmers believe that they're being left behind by it. And so they have some proposals for their platform. So, one, they believe that US senators should be directly elected. They also believe that the government should be in control of the currency, and they also believe that there should be recognition of their right to form unions. Now, at this time, remember, workers don't really have rights. The Gilded Age and the time after this is not known for its I would say it's not known as being worker friendly. Workers don't have rights. There's no such thing as workers' compensation in an era where working can be very dangerous. So, if you recall, between 1880 and 1900, approximately 35,000 workers died every year from workplace accidents. And so they don't have any protections. And so they want to form unions. So they'll have an organization to speak for them. So they'll be able to negotiate between the owners of the corporation and themselves. Uh, Populists will also desire income, a graduated income tax. Now, one of the era's, I will say one of, yes, one of the era's greatest populists at this time is Tom Watson, and he's out of Georgia. Because this is also an era, if we recall, where African Americans are witnessing a huge restriction on their rights. We're entering the Jim Crow era. So we are seeing African Americans in the South, because at this time, the majority of African Americans will live in the South. Redeemers are back in power. And so we'll see a large amount of segregation and a large amount of discrimination. And so uh, Black farmers will not be able to join the Farmers Alliance, so they create their own alliance known as the Colored Farmers Alliance. The Colored Farmers Alliance will attempt to organize a strike of cotton pickers or sharecroppers. However, their coalition is violently suppressed by local authorities and landowners. So in enters Tom Watson, who is Georgia's leading populist, and he believes that Black and white farmers really shared common grievances. They're dealing with the same issues. And because of this, Watson believes that it's possible for them to unite for a common goal. Watson famously says, and I quote, "You are kept apart that you may be separately fleeced of your earnings." This race antagonism perpetuates a monetary system which beggars both. I love this quote because what he's essentially saying is that Black people and white people are being kept apart, but you're dealing with the same issues. Both of you are having issues with money. Both of you are want recognition of unions. You are both dealing with the same issues, but because of the system of racism, you are kept apart. So each one of you can be separately fleeced of your income, and that it's a monetary system which is creating a system of beggars for both. He famously says this. In 1894, actually, a coalition of white populists and Black Republicans will actually come together. And when they come together, they will win control of North Carolina. When this happens, you see a lot of positive, I will say, aspects. You see a positive outcome. When white populists and Black Republicans come together in 1894 in North Carolina, there is more spending on public education, for example, which will help both races. There is more Black office holding. However, what happens in North Carolina is not something that will be common. It is not common at all in the Deep South. As a matter of fact, populism is defeated in most southern states because there is this idea of putting Black farmers and white farmers on an equal playing field. And so a lot of the, dare I say, propaganda at this time will speak of populism as being something that will promote, quote, Negro supremacy. And so, because of that, populism will fail in the South. It will fail in most Southern states because race antagonism is keeping these two groups apart that actually have a lot more in common. They are sharing common grievances, but they're kept apart due to racial antagonism. Okay? All right. So let's get to populism and labor. How will populism fare in the North? So in 1894, populists will try to appeal to industrial workers. So in the North, if we recall, this is where they have factories and textile mills and all of these things, right? And so in 1894, populists will try to appeal to and engage with these northern industrial workers. However, the language of populism won't really appeal to them. One of the main leaders of populism will be William Jennings Bryan, who we'll be talking about in just a few moments. William Jennings Bryan was, I would say, very religious, and he brings a lot of this um, Christian revivalism to a lot of his speeches. And so for urban workers who are a lot more diverse, who are immigrants largely, who are Roman Catholic largely, the revivalist atmosphere of a lot of these populist gatherings won't really relate to them. It will have very little meaning to them. So they'll have a hard time really appealing to this different population, to this largely immigrant and Catholic population. And so in 1894, instead, a lot of these urban industrial workers, instead of leaning towards the populists, they will lean to Republicans who at this time are claiming that raising tariff rates would restore prosperity by protecting manufacturers and industrial workers from competition of imported goods and cheap foreign labor. So in the North, a lot of these industrial workers will lean Republican instead of going populist. Populists also have this idea, or I will say William Jennings Bryan, rather, and the populists will campaign for something called bimetalism. They're trying to get more money in circulation. So in 1896, Democrats and populists will join together. It's an election year. So in 1896, Democrats and populists will join together to support William Jennings Bryan. And so then on the Republican side running, you'll have William McKinley. So Democrats and populists are supporting William Jennings Bryan, who is a populist. And he is calling for the unrestricted minting of silver money because he believes that increasing the amount of currency in circulation would raise the prices that farmers would receive for their crops and make it easier for them to pay off their debts. William Jennings Bryan was a fiery speaker, and when he was about 36 years old, he speaks at a national convention where in his revivalist tone, he says, "You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." So, why are they going for bimetallism? Why is there this big debate versus the gold standard and the silver standard, which is what populists will support? So, the gold standard is something that's supported by Republicans, bankers, financiers, and industrialists. So I'll try to break this down to make it relatively easy to understand. Okay, you ready? You're ready. If you're not, you can pause me. I won't get offended. Actually, because of technical difficulties, I'll pause here and I'll come back with the gold versus silver standards.